keeping watch over the gateway between Jordan and its warring neighbour, on guard to protect against an enemy threatening to spill over sovereign lines. In recent months, Daesh has gained ground in southern Syria, its affiliate taking over territory near the Jordanian border. The border has been sealed since July last year, when Daesh attacked Jordanian soldiers outside the Raqqa refugee camp, and since then, Jordan has stepped up its security measures.
Among the most important, the repositioning of the Jordanian armed forces and adjusting the rules of engagement from attacking any moving targets coming towards Jordan to attacking any target, static or kinetic, near or far.
Jordan is part of the US-led coalition fighting Daesh in Syria, and there's been speculation that with the threat creeping closer, Jordan and the US may engage in active ground combat.
The American model, the British model, for example, there are some specific operations, special force operations against certain targets. So I don't think that Jordan is excluding this option. Actually, it's on the table.
I don't believe Jordan will slip into open warfare in which Jordanian forces enter deep into Syrian territory. I believe they pose a limited threat, even though they are the closest geographically.
But it's more than 6 years of being on high alert, taking its toll on Jordan's security forces. And will Daesh look to exploit that? As Daesh loses ground in Iraq and Syria, there's some fear Jordan might become the group's next target, a place to try carve out a new stronghold and to create chaos from the inside through sleeper cells and lone wolf attackers.
This medieval crusader castle is one of Jordan's main tourist attractions. In December, it was the scene of a deadly Daesh attack. Gunmen fired at police down in Raqqa town and then fled here, briefly taking hostages. At least 10 people were killed, including one Canadian tourist. This place would usually be crawling with sightseers, but this attack was another blow to the country's already struggling tourism industry. And there's fears that as the threat from Daesh continues to grow, Jordan will increasingly be in the firing line for these kind of attacks.
But the threat looming on Jordan's horizon may have been bred closer to home. Jordan has the highest number of fighters in Iraq and Syria per capita. Thought to be at least 2,500, the US Congress estimates it's more like 4,000. Islamic groups expert Hassan Abu Haniyeh says there are different levels of those who leave to fight.
Some of them follow an ideology, meaning they adhere to the Salafi jihadi movement. However, some of a very young age were affected by the propaganda. At the beginning, they left to fight thinking they were fighting for justice against a regime killing its people. But these jihadi groups brainwashed them.
But for many, the decision to go and to support groups like Daesh is driven by a desire to rebel and escape.
There are a variety of reasons, including the bad economic situation, as well as the blocked avenues to political change, and as a result, violence is the only option to express their desire for change.
But this sentiment is also shared by some who stayed behind. Support for Daesh has been displayed openly in places like Amman, but the government has been increasingly cracking down on anyone expressing Daesh sympathies, and it has imprisoned fighters that have come home.
We know that in the Arab world, the prisons graduated all of these jihadis, and thus the cycle of violence continues. So we need to find a more flexible and transparent way to deal with the prisoners.
Amir Sabaleh says that without a proper plan of de-radicalization, together with social reforms, this trend will continue.
You cannot, at the end, keep depriving many youth from participating in building their future, and then you question why they became radical.
As Jordan tries to deal with its internal threats, at the border, it's also being forced to look to the approaching battle and what happens after Raqqa. Will Daesh retreat and move further south to regroup? And will Jordan be at risk of bearing the brunt of Daesh's backlash? Yvette McCullough in Amman for the Newsmakers.
To further discuss Jordan's security issues, we're joined from Amman by journalist and political analyst Daoud Kuttab, and from Lancaster, England, Simon Mabon, a lecturer in international relations at Lancaster University. Thanks both so much for joining us. Daoud, let me start with you. You're in Amman. How much do you think Jordan is actually in danger of becoming a primary Daesh battleground, given that mention there of lone wolf attacks and sleeper cells believed to be in Jordan?
I think there are two areas that Jordan has an Achilles heel. One is the borders. If the retreating Daesh militants come close to the Jordanian border, they might make life of civilians on the Jordanian side difficult if they start bombing or shelling the area. And the second, as you mentioned, the sleeper cells or some individual lone wolves who might carry out an operation here and there. But I don't think it's a strategic problem. I think it's a problem that Jordan is being very careful to avoid. They've really revved up their security at most malls and most public locations, and their intelligence service is usually very good, and normally they can detect some of the groups individuals before they do the actions. But that will not protect them from every single possible lone wolf attack.
Okay, Simon, before I ask for your response, I wanted to listen to something Brigadier General Sami Kafawin, who is the commander of the Jordan Border Guards Forces, had to say.
We know that there are some Daesh people or ISIS people inside the camp. As I said, they consider it as a safe haven for them. They're trying to control and to create some cells inside the camp. We are sure that they have almost the whole weapon systems. They can use it inside the camp.
Now, Simon, of course, by the camp, he means the various refugee camps throughout Jordan that more and more Jordanians seem to be viewing as a threat to Jordanian stability. Do you think the general there is acknowledging the severity of the threat of Daesh in Jordan, or do they maybe feel it's being slightly exaggerated?
I think what he's doing is acknowledging that there is the potential for there to be a threat. And I think we've got to look at this idea of a threat in a number of different ways. A threat to whom and a threat from what? If we think about what the sheer number of refugees in Jordan is, you've got around 630,000 officially recognized refugees in Jordan. But then you've actually got probably around 800,000 more individuals that are unrecognized, not officially counted. And I think that obviously within that number, there are going to be a smaller number, a much smaller number that sympathize with Daesh or that are perhaps Daesh agents, if you will. But that number is far, far smaller than the 1.4 million people that have fled the fight and that have been forced from their homes. And they're facing a serious threat, a serious threat to their survival amidst seriously precarious conditions. This sense of instability and uncertainty that refugees are living in across the region.
So, Daoud, you think the government is doing the best job it can, but what about those refugee camps? Are they being monitored? Are there enough resources to police them and monitor them properly in Jordan?
Well, I mean, only 20% of the Syrian refugees, the 1.4 million that your guest alluded to, live in these refugee camps. And there's also a number of refugee camps on the Syrian side of the borders, which have also become a safe haven for some of the Daesh militants and the Nusra militants. So it's not clear what refugee camps he's talking about, but they do try to keep a close lid on these camps. Again, the problem is not necessarily from the camp, but from either cross-border shelling or lone wolves that might be free at large, or 80% of the population lives outside of the camps.
Simon, let me ask you, also mentioned in that report are the issues involving the economy, the struggling economy actually in Jordan. How much do you think it's fueling extremism and the potential for vulnerability and more attacks?
I think if you look at extremism and vulnerability across the world, you see that economic issues are a really important factor. Not always, of course, but often they are a really important factor, because that leads to all kinds of questions about survival, about meeting basic needs, and about making sure that yourself and your family can live and continue to live. And if the Jordanian economy is starting to stagnate and tourist numbers are dropping because of the perceived threat, as you've alluded to in your report, then there are some serious worries for people. And if there are those worries, then more and more people are starting to be seduced by the Daesh ideology that's starting to creep in. But I think that the Jordanian case is actually quite a robust case. It's been a real centre of stability at the heart of a region that's been in flux. And I think that sense of stability will continue. I think that the Jordanian state is a stable state. And while we're talking about some interesting issues, I think we've got to be careful not to try and make a huge issue out of this right now, because there are other ways that the Jordanian state can deal with it, as we've seen with the way that they've dealt with the returning foreign fighters. And I'd hope that the regime would also try and address these economic issues, because there are other factors at play that can be addressed to try and resolve the threat posed by groups like Daesh.
Well, then let's talk about, Dawood, if we can. Let's talk about the government itself, the Hashemite kingdom. Many did predict, especially during the Arab Spring, that the Hashemite kingdom would take a hit, that it was somehow an outdated monarchy that would also collapse in the fervor of the Arab Spring across the Middle East. It didn't. It survived. And can you say that it does have the respect of the Jordanian people for the most part, in order, and the support that's needed in order to better fight this battle against extremism in Jordan?
I think not only, as you said, it survived, but it's actually done very well. The king and the government were very clever in not fighting the protesters, but at times protecting them and giving them water and giving them a chance to express themselves. And then the king, after a year, I think, made 43 amendments to the Constitution. So he made some kind of a response to the demands. We're losing some of those improvements, but still, I think they were able to be ahead of the curve and you know, finesse it and basically co-opt the leaders in some way, and they are no longer a threat. Now, the longer question that you posed is, what do people think of the monarchy? What do they think of King Abdullah and the Hashemites and so on? I think, you know, there is a general consensus that the Hashemites are kind of a national unity cement, that they're keeping the two basic elements of Jordanian society, the East Bank Jordanian tribes and the Palestinian Jordanians of Palestinian origin. And it so happens that the king, Hashemite from Saudi Arabia, married to a Palestinian from the West Bank, allows his own family to reflect this kind of mutuality and the mix of culture and so on. And so I think they've been able to give enough rights and enough powers to people. And because the problems of the nearby republics in which people have seen Syria hand over power to their son, and we've seen Egypt implode, and we've seen other countries not do very well, people say, you know, we're blessed with this country and this leadership, and so people are not in the mood to kind of rock the boat, if you will.
Simon, I saw you nodding your head there. I'm going to assume you agree. Do Jordanians actually see the failure of many of the Arab Spring movements as a sign that they actually do have a good case scenario in the Middle East for their leadership?
I'm not sure it's about the failure of the Arab Spring movements, but I think it's about the potential outcomes. I know a lot of people have referred to what's happened in Syria and Iraq with the real descent into chaos and catastrophe there as a means of suggesting that, look, we are glad and we're happy with the situation that we have because we're not Syria, we're not Iraq, or we're not Yemen. And in some of the research that I've done recently, an increasing number of people have said, look, we're not interested in democracy. We're not interested in that. We just want stability. We certainly don't want to go down the route of of a collapsing state like you've seen in Syria and Yemen. And so I think that Jordan is one of those prime examples of people being relatively happy with what they have, with a monarchy and a regime that is stable, maintaining the status quo, and trying to keep the peace, as it will. So I think there is that fear of the unknown, and there is a sense of being thankful for the stability that people have.
Duad, let me ask you, the Jordanians have always managed to succeed particularly better than their Middle Eastern counterparts in the realm of diplomacy, and we have seen King Abdullah's recent meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. But given the disdain for President Trump throughout the Middle East, and particularly his issues like his Muslim travel ban, focusing on many Sunni Muslims, for example, do you think an alliance between the Jordanian leadership and President Trump could potentially aggravate jihadist tendencies in Jordan?
Well, any kind of alliance between Jordan and the U.S. Aggravates the tendencies. I don't think whether it's Trump or not Trump. I think the key issue, though, is the Middle East conflict, the issue of Syria, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. These are the issues that, and of course the economy. These are the issues that are in the heart of Jordanians, and the jihadists are not going to be happy no matter what, whoever is in the White House. I think Jordan is a clear U.S. ally with very strong relations with both Democrats and Republicans in America. So I don't think that being supportive of Trump or not is going to make any difference to the jihadists. They're against anybody working with Americans. So I think on that level, they're not going to be able to sway around. There is a lot of efforts to fight against the extremist thoughts, because it's not just the extremist members, but there's a lot of ideology that's being spread around, and there's a lot of need to uproot a lot of the extremism that is in the minds of some people, which are fed by the Daesh and other groups. But it's quite scary how some people think, sometimes they don't want to say Merry Christmas to their Christian neighbors, or they have some really weird thoughts and ideas about how to treat women and so on. So that is worrisome to some, but there's a lot of effort now to try to deal with this through the mosque, through the Waqf, through television, through media, through universities, through working with young people, trying to understand them and respond to them. But of course, the economy, if it doesn't do well, if people feel disenfranchised politically, if people feel that their government is not doing what they want, and if they see the peace process in Palestine totally collapsing again, I think that would be the kind of things that help the Daesh to recruit their members.
Okay, Simon, just a minute left. Quick final words.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The other thing that we should remember is that this isn't the first time that Jordan has experienced some kind of political, jihadist, Salafist instability. In the previous decade, you saw threats from Al-Qaeda and groups like that, and Jordan has learned its lesson from that. But I think what's paramount for the Jordanian kingdom is to actually resolve its economic issues. If it can build on the economy, continue that small degree of growth, and maintain this sort of more positive system of governance that's happening, then we can actually say that the Jordanian kingdom has done well and has managed to circumvent this serious threat posed by Daesh.
Okay. Simon, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us from Lancaster, and Daud Kutab joining us there from Amman. Thank you so much for being on the Newsmakers.
Thanks.
You're welcome.